Welcome in to another week of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. John Alden with you here on this Monday morning is when I'm recording this. You're likely watching this in the afternoon or in the evening, or heck, you may be watching this overnight. Maybe you're an overnight trucker and you got this sitting in your little cup holder, and instead of listening to some tunes, you're listening to this ridiculous 27-year-old man, if that's what you want to call me, talk about Indiana basketball, Indiana football, whatever it may be. If you're one of those people, or if you're not one of those people, I appreciate you regardless, and I'm happy to have you. Hopefully you're happy to be here as well. If you weren't, then I don't know why you clicked on the video, but nonetheless, you're here. So welcome in. It's another week of the show, and I'm ready to get started here. Drew Rosenberg is going to join us today. Normally don't have him on kind of similar to Dylan Sen as quickly, between times of having him as we are. But he actually reached out to me over the weekend, mentioning he wanted to talk about some NBA stuff that was some pretty big deal stuff that took place on the the trading side of things. So we'll have him on to do that, as well as talk about some Indiana basketball. Man, and I guess while I've already mentioned it, it's just the way things went down on Friday between Indiana and Purdue. I don't think you could have written up you could have had a much more heartbreaking way, I guess. You can always lose on, a buzzer beater. You could get blown out, that sort of thing. Actually, as I said on the post-game wrap-up show, I think a blown out, at least with the current state of affairs with Indiana basketball, a blowout would have been less heartbreaking than it typically would, right? Because I had mentioned last week that if you don't win, it's almost better if you lose by 30 points, at least when it comes to, realizing where things are heading. And because of the way that Indiana played, which was very well, but the fact that they didn't get the result they wanted, now you're just kind of sitting here like, okay, like we know this team has the ability to get the job done, but they can't. Or haven't. I hate to say they can't, because they very well could have done it on Friday, but they didn't do that. And we had the Maryland result over a week ago. Now we have the Purdue result, which had very similar finishes. Indiana, now in the Maryland game, Indiana did not have control for the entirety of the game. They battled their way back in that one. Purdue, they were dictating pace. They out-rebounded the Boilers. Yeah, they had some turnovers that were pretty costly at times, but Indiana was having their way with the way that they, with their style of basketball, with the Boilermakers, more so than I think anybody ever would have anticipated, especially in Mackey Arena. Fans were frustrated. You could tell the team, as in Purdue, was frustrated, especially with how things were being officiated at times. And Indiana fans were, annoyed with the officiating as well. I'm not trying to say it was, a one-sided officiating affair by any stretch. But with the way that the game had played out, there was, even at halftime, whenever you realize Indiana's up and you're like, okay, Purdue is probably going to make a run, I was very confident that Indiana was going to find a way to get the job done. We all know that Mike Woodson has his back against the wall. And under those circumstances, I think even dating back to last year, I think we've seen Mike Woodson kind of put together some of the best performances, not even necessarily from a coaching standpoint, but we've seen the teams coached by Mike Woodson play their best most of the time when they need a result, right? And I think that's what we saw on Friday night when Indiana went to West Lafayette and nearly got the upset. It would have been the best springboard into this portion of the season that you could have asked for, because now you have Wisconsin tomorrow. Again, something the horse that we've beaten to death here is that Indiana hasn't won at the Kohl Center ever, and hasn't won on the road at Wisconsin in general in over 25 years. So knowing that is your next opponent, and if history continues to repeat itself, you continue to dig yourself even more so of a hole than you're already in. Now, I know most people, and even I, have fallen further into this camp than I had previously, but most people have their mind made up about Mike Woodson. But I still want the team to succeed. I still would love to see them figure out how to turn things around. And if that begins with an upset at Wisconsin, it's kind of your last laugh. And I know if you watch the post-game wrap-up show on Friday night, or if you haven't, feel free to go check that out. But Kyler had mentioned, because I had posed the question to him, like, hey, when do you think like the time runs out for this team on making the postseason? The postseason that matters, which is the NCAA tournament. And he had mentioned these next 3 games. If you go 0-3, I think the opportunities after that no longer can help you get to where you want to go, or at least where Indiana would hope to get to at that point. Obviously, when you've adjusted expectations already, because the talk at the beginning of the year was that Indiana could be one of the top contenders in the conference. Well, they're showing right now that they're not that by being 5-6. And at this point, there's no reason that anyone should realistically believe that this team will win the Big Ten. Now, rattle off if Indiana just I'm not even going to humor what I was going to say, because I throw too many hypotheticals out there that just aren't realistic for this team. Should this team have been competing for a Big Ten title? Yes. And the fact that they are where they are, that really shows, I think, kind of the issue that we're dealing with right now, is that when you can put together a team that is this talented and they continue to flounder and just be inconsistent, then this just isn't working. And I'm still going to hope for the best. And I do believe that they have it in them to win games like Wisconsin on the road. But until they do it, we should no longer be surprised. And I don't think we are surprised any longer. Like, even though it was very heartbreaking to see them lose to Purdue in the manner in which they did, even though it was heartbreaking to see them lose in the manner in which they did, nobody was surprised, right? Like, I think that was kind of, once we got rolling on the post-game wrap-up show on Friday, like, that's why it just, there wasn't a ton of reaction, and maybe there would have been had they won. I'm not too sure. But I think I also mentioned apathy. I think a lot of fans, like, maybe they were into it on Friday for a certain period of time, and then all of a sudden, once they realized, that Purdue got the lead towards the end, I don't know how. I wasn't shocked that Indiana couldn't get it done. I don't know why Miles Rice had the ball in his hand at the end when he had 0 points on the night. I don't know. I guess I haven't really talked about that portion of the game. I don't know why Trey Galloway didn't have the ball in his hands. You heard Matt Painter talk about that as well in his post-game press conference. That's a coaching mistake. And I didn't really fault Mike Woodson a ton for this past Friday. He has taken a ton of heat, rightfully so. I just thought the performance in and of itself was a lot better than we had seen, and so it just wasn't my first thought to go at Mike Woodson. But the decision to have the ball in Miles Rice's hands and for him to do what he did with it, which was nothing. And I know a lot of people wanted the foul call on that shot attempt, but it wasn't super egregious. And you saw the way Umar Ballo reacted after the fact. Like, what was the game plan on that final play? So a lot of question marks, and I'm sure we'll continue to see question marks, honestly. I'm curious we'll get to some YouTube comments here in a bit. I do want to go over a couple more things, non-Indiana basketball related. Then we're going to bring in our segment with Drew Rosenberg, and then we'll get into some YouTube comments on the other side. And then once we get through those, we'll see what our time looks like. And if we get into anything else, we will. And if not, then we'll save it for Wednesday. But as far as YouTube comments, as far as they go, let me know if you're at the breaking point for Indiana basketball. Like, are you checked out? Maybe not checked out as in like you don't care about Indiana basketball anymore, but checked out from this season. Like, do you care what happens? What portion of the schedule, like what loss will it take for you to be like, okay, this is no longer like, this is it, right? Maybe we've already hit that point, but I'm curious. Let me know in the YouTube comments of this video, and we'll talk about that on Wednesday. But let's go ahead and move into a couple of other things I want to get into before we bring on Drew Rosenberg to. We'll talk more Indiana basketball, but we're actually going to start that conversation with the NBA stuff going on when it comes to the trade blocks, and the trade deadline is this Thursday. So there's some crazy stuff going on with the NBA. I don't think I realized. So the number one thing that Drew and I are going to talk about is the trade between the Lakers and the Mavericks of Anthony Davis and Luka Doncic. I don't think I realized how death-defying, like, how big of a magnitude of an impact. I don't know if I'm using the right verbiage with this. I don't think I realized how big of a deal. That's just probably how I should say it instead of trying to get fancy with my words. I don't think I realized how big of a deal that trade was, but Drew's going to break it all down for us here in just a little bit. But big news for, wow, did my voice just crack? Maybe we should take a nice sip of coffee before we transition over to Indiana football here. But big news on the transfer portal front for Indiana football. I don't think this happened. I might have missed this on Friday. I saw that it happened on Friday, but I don't know if it happened before or after the show. But Pat Coogan, the center from Notre Dame, previously starting center for Notre Dame, I should say, he's announced his commitment to Indiana. And we all know Indiana's not going to have Mike Kadick. And when you can bring over the center for the team that defeated you in the college football playoff and then went on to be in the national championship game, I don't think you could ask for a whole lot more when it comes to bringing in guys that you can plug and play into your offensive line. As we all know, having a strong offensive line is one of the most important things, maybe if not the most important thing, other than having a competent quarterback when it comes to having success on the offensive end for football, right? And even more so, like, you're kind of narrowing it down even further, when you have a center who is rock solid and can keep that entire line together. I mean, I think Indiana is setting themselves up to continue the success from last season to this upcoming fall. And I mean, that's the type of transfer that, if it continues to work out, like, all of this is just going to snowball into bigger and better things year in and year out if you're able to continue to follow it up with success. We're already seeing what one awesome year can do when you bring in a guy like Fernando Mendoza, and now, of course, a center like Pat Coogan. A lot of good stuff could continue to be on the horizon for Indiana football, and it's going to be fun. I know a lot of people, not even a lot, I've seen a few instances of people who are worried about just last year being a fluky season. And I do think as fans, we all worry about that potentially being the case in some degree. Some of us more so or less so than others. But I think there's substance behind going into next year as opposed to what happened after the COVID season. Because we were all super excited after 2020 going into the year 21, thinking that Indiana could compete once again near the top of the Big Ten. And that was the biggest letdown in history for Indiana football. I don't think there's any reason whatsoever to think that might be the case going into 2025. And even for starters, when you look at the way the 2025 season starts as opposed to the 2021 season, you had to start off with a pretty tough 2 out of first 3 games. You had to start off on the road at Iowa with all this expectation that you're going to continue to be a really good team, and you get humbled more so than, I mean, you got destroyed in Kinnick Stadium. That can deflate any team, no matter how good you were expected to be. I mean, look at what Indiana did to Penn State in 2020. I mean, they had expectations, even though it was a weird COVID season, but Penn State went on to lose their next 4 games after that. They started 0-5. I mean, and I know the COVID season was weird in general, but bad losses, unexpected losses against good teams can do, especially in the opening part of the season, that could really set things going in a bad direction. And so, thankfully, Indiana is no longer, they have not had, this will now be their second straight season where they don't have to open up with a Big Ten game. They'll begin the year against Old Dominion, a team from, I think they're in the Sun Belt. Yeah, they're in the Sun Belt. used to be a part of Conference USA, I think. Either way, team from the G5 level that is nothing to, write home about, but it should be a good start to the season. After that, let's take a sip of coffee real quick. After that, you have either Indiana State is game 2 or 3. You have Kennesaw State in their second year of the FBS. You'll have them coming to town, which I'm sure they'll be somebody Indiana should push over. And then Indiana State. So your first 3 games, I think my voice just cracked again. Your first 3 games for Indiana football next year is we're not going to learn a ton, I wouldn't think, about this team. The one thing that when it comes to expectations and knowing if we're going to see something similar, at least in terms of the quality of the product, if Indiana takes care of all 3 of those teams the way that they should, then I think going into that 4th game against Illinois, fans should be comfortable saying, okay, yeah, Indiana is no longer the Indiana of old. They're not going to struggle against G5 opponents or FCS opponents the way that they did back under almost every other head coaching regime. So if they take care of business in those first 3 games, then it really just comes down to taking care of the Big Ten. Like, where do you find yourself in 2025 stacking up against the best of the best, and then the middle tier, and so on and so forth. Illinois, of course, last year, one of the better teams that Indiana did not face, and to have them be your very first conference opponent, especially at home in Memorial Stadium, should provide for a really good environment and a tone setter for the rest of the Big Ten slate. After that, you'll go to Iowa, face them in Iowa City, Kinnick Stadium. Will they deflate all of this Signetti momentum just like they were able to do with Tom Allen? Hopefully, if they lose, it's not that impactful long term, but that's going to be a tough game. It's one game that I predicted to be a loss for Indiana whenever I looked at the schedule initially when they revealed it a few months ago. And then right after that, I think you have a bye. And then after that, you go on the road at once again for your second road game in a row. You'll go to Oregon, another tough one. Indiana could lose back-to-back games for the first time in the Curt Cignetti era. Now, that's nothing to be ashamed of against those 2 opponents, but that may very well be where Indiana finds themselves at that point. And the rest of the schedule, I don't know for certain off the top of my head. I believe they return home to face Michigan State after that. And then from there on out, I know you got Maryland somewhere on there on the road. You got Penn State on the road, Wisconsin at home, and then, of course, Purdue on the road. I might be forgetting a game or 2. Again, I don't have the schedule immediately in front of me, but it is a manageable schedule. But I think you can chalk up those when you're projecting where things might be. I think the 3, I projected 9-3 for those who didn't see the previous episode a few months back. I don't think that's anything to be upset about, depending on how the games look. Like, if you lose 3 close ones, Iowa, Oregon, and Penn State on the road, yeah, you'd love to get 1 or 2 of those, especially if you hope to get back to the college football playoff. But if Indiana found themselves taking a step back, going 9-3, yeah, it'd be disappointing. And of course, Curt Cignetti wouldn't want us to look at it this way, but it's still far and away. The fact that we're even talking about 9-3 as a disappointment, it shows how far Indiana football has already risen in in this new era with Curt Cignetti. It's awesome, but it's crazy at the same time. Let's see what else. It's Super Bowl week. We're going to get Chiefs Eagles 2.0 with a year in between where we didn't have Chiefs and Eagles. Are we excited about the Super Bowl? I think it's something that as Americans will always take in, whether we like the matchup or not. But it feels like the overall vibe between the Chiefs and the Eagles is kind of like meh. Like, do we really want to see the same thing? I think a lot of people wanted at least one unique opponent in the Super Bowl, whether that would have been the Bills from the AFC or the Commanders from the NFC, and we didn't get either one of those. I would have loved. I cannot believe I just feel so bad for Josh Allen, in the fact that he just can't get it done against Patrick Mahomes, and I think he still has a couple of chances left in him before his Super Bowl window runs out. But this felt like the year it needed to be Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills taking over the AFC, and they couldn't get it done. It almost feels like that. I mean, maybe it has nothing to do with this, but the fact that they won in Buffalo in the regular season, it did kind of make me wonder when that game happened the way that it did. I'm like, man, if they have to face Kansas City in Kansas City in the postseason, it feels like it just sets up for the Chiefs to get back to the Super Bowl. And what do you know? That's the way things played out for them. So it's unfortunate, but hey, what do we want to see? Would we rather see a three-peat from the Chiefs, or would we rather see them dethroned by the Eagles and Jalen Hurts gets to have a moment? Saquon Barkley, maybe he wins MVP. And I think even if the Chiefs are the best team, I think Saquon Barkley at this current point in time, not only is he the best running back in the NFL, but he may be just the best overall athlete in the NFL, period, right now. And so I think it'd be cool to see either result play out. I think the three-peat is just the fact that that's never happened. I find it hard to believe that that's never happened. With the Patriots dynasty and then some of the old school, like Packers dynasties, the beginning of the National Football League. Like it surprised me that we've never had a 3-time back-to-back NFL champion. So I guess that in and of itself would be cool. I know a lot of people just hate Mahomes and I want to see him do it, but here's my thing. If they do it this year, fine. Have your three-peat. But at that point, I think that's when I'm like, okay, this is it. You've done everything. Let's take a break from the whole Chiefs shtick nonsense, whatever. Do we think Andy Reid retires? Like, when's Andy Reid going to be satisfied? What's it going to take to break up the dynasty that is the Chiefs, by the way? Like, who's going to retire first? Travis Kelce, Andy? Like, something's going to eventually give when it comes to, tearing apart this dynasty. So that'll be interesting to see, of course, which result ends up playing out. Let me know what you think of the Super Bowl if you'd like. I'm curious. What do you do for the Super Bowl party as well? And I know I haven't thrown that hotline out there in a while, and that's for, I guess, one main reason is that I think the hotline, because I used to primarily use it for the Out of Touch podcast, but because I went so long without using it, I think I might have lost almost the rights to the number. But I have to reclaim it if I decide to utilize it again. So I'm not going to throw the hotline number out there. If I decide to re-enable it, I'll throw it out there. And by the way, for the first time in 2 months, putting out a new Out of Touch podcast episode this Thursday with our guy Mitchell Page. So if you like mine and Mitchell's personalities, but you want a little break from the sports stuff and you want a little bit of a different flavor, check that out on Thursday on the Out of Touch Media YouTube channel. And then one other thing that I just remembered as I was talking about, what's it gonna take for the Chiefs dynasty to break up. It reminded me of something else that's already taking place, and it's the Ohio State football staff, I should say. They win one national championship, and it's like everybody's leaving. Chip Kelly is going to be an OC in the NFL once again. You got Justin Fry leaving to be an offensive line coach. I think that's what he does. He's going to be the same thing in the NFL as well for the Arizona Cardinals, I believe. A few other names. I don't have the entire list in front of me, but I've been seeing the reports coming across Twitter and different social media platforms. But is it because, like, when you win the national championship and you're not the head coach, is it just like, oh, okay, well, we've done this. Now let's go try to do something else? Because I don't think that's a problem. But it's crazy how, like, one national championship just breaks up so many really good head coaches or, good coaches as a part of a staff. So Ohio State's having to kind of rebuild their coaching staff preparing for next year. Like, it makes you wonder if they had lost, would these guys still be making the moves for the positions that they're taking? Or would they still be sitting there like, you know what, we can get this done at Ohio State and then I'll go try something else out? Would that happen with, look at I guess like Notre Dame, Al Golden taking the defensive coordinator job with Cincinnati. He's had enough. And then maybe wording that makes it sound like more of a negative thing than it needs to be. But like Indiana didn't, they got to the college football playoff and the only staff change you saw was Tino Sinceri going to become the OC at UCLA. So that's, would it have been different? And honestly, it probably would have been different had Indiana, gone on to maybe not. Let's just say they would have gotten to the national championship and then lost to Ohio State again. I think you'd see, a decent chunk still stick around, maybe. But I think you probably would have lost both Brian Haynes and Mike Shanahan to different whatever positions it could have been. I'm sure you would have lost maybe a few others as well. But when you get that far, it's hard to replicate that. It's already going to be hard for Indiana to replicate what they did last year in subsequent seasons. It's hard no matter who you are. Even if you're in the elite of the elite, it's hard to have back-to-back seasons where you achieve the same level of success that you just had or exceeding it, right? So, man, we covered a lot of good stuff there, I feel like. If I'm feeling good on a Monday, hopefully you're enjoying this and feeling good as well. But, I'm sitting here, I just looked up at the clock. We've gone 26 minutes and already covered a decent amount of stuff. But let's go ahead and halt the brakes for a second. We're going to bring on Drew Rosenberg to talk more about the NBA and, of course, Indiana men's basketball as well. And then on the other side, we'll likely wrap up the show going over some of your YouTube comments, particularly on things regarding the Indiana Hoosiers and all that good stuff. So without further ado, let's continue this conversation right now with Drew Rosenberg of HoosierIllustrated.com. Joining us once again, it is Drew Rosenberg from HoosierIllustrated.com right here on In Touch with Indiana Sports. Welcome back and happy Monday.
Happy Monday, John. I wasn't expecting to be back, but, this might have been one of the craziest weekends in NBA history, so it kind of, forced my hand a little.
Yeah, you actually reached out to me last night and said, hey, can I come on and we can talk about this whole Anthony Davis, Luka Doncic thing? And me being somebody who it's not that I'm not plugged into the NBA. I don't think I realized how impactful what had happened over the weekend between those two franchises and those two players was. So I guess we'll just start right there. Give me the lowdown. What's going on, or what led to this? I from what I've gathered already, this was an under the table type of move, and it was very surprising to a lot of people.
Yeah, this was one of the most historic moves I've seen in NBA history. It might go down as, one of the biggest, most surprising, craziest trades in maybe North American sports history. And I don't think that's a crazy thing to say when you really break it down. Like, for starters, you have I would consider Luka Doncic the second best player on the planet, coming off a finals appearance, 25, not even in his prime yet. So, these type of players, you don't trade them. It's the Michael Jordans, the LeBrons, the Steph Currys, the Nikola Jokic's. Like, these are the players that are supposed to be, in theory, untouchable. And when they do get traded, usually there's a lot of noise around it. At the start, look at Anthony Davis when he was traded from the Pelicans to the Lakers 5 years ago. Anthony Davis requested a trade. Teams had the chance to offer, and it was very public that Anthony Davis was getting traded. There was nothing about Luka Doncic getting traded until it actually came out, to the point where when Shams reported it, I thought Shams got hacked. Shams had to tweet out, this is real, because apparently he got 300 text messages asking him if he got hacked when it happened. It was one of the most shocking things ever. And the fact Luka didn't request a trade, it's so unheard of, because usually, these players, if you're going to trade a player like Luka Doncic, you're going to make it public and go to the highest bidder. But this was under the table, completely under the radar. And the fact the Mavericks were the ones that reached out to the Lakers is even more surprising with it. Because, usually a team calls about a Luka Doncic type player and they get hung up on immediately. You don't answer the phone for that type of player. You don't trade a player like Luka Doncic. And I'm still in shock. It's 2 days later, and I still cannot believe this happened.
What do you think was the primary reason for them going through this process and getting rid of somebody who is as great in the league as Luka Doncic?
So the two reasons Nico Harrison, the Mavericks GM, kind of pointed to was Luka Doncic's weight. They said he kind of had ballooned a bit and got over 270 pounds at points this year, which, Luka's weight and conditioning has always kind of been an issue. But at the same time, he's been playing 40 minutes, his entire career. He played over 100 games last year, led them to the finals. They don't get to the finals without Luka Doncic last year and how great he was. Yes, in the finals, if you watch that series, the Celtics exposed him and went at him every possession. So that's kind of what Nico Harrison was, alluding to when he talked about wanting to get better defensively. And that was why he wanted Anthony Davis. But at the same time, you don't trade a Luka Doncic at 25. He has 10 years, at least 10 years probably of his, athletic prime left. Like, this is a top 2, top 3 player for the next 10, 15 years in the NBA. You don't trade that type of player because it's a lot easier to build around them and get pieces to play with them than it is to find this type of player. And I cannot believe – I think the Lakers might have thought it was a joke when they first got the call, like, hey, you interested in Luka?
Well, let me ask you this, and maybe this just shows my ignorance on how franchise tags work, but did Luka Doncic not have one on him?
So Luka was up for the Supermax. The way the NBA works, like if they kind of reward players for staying home, like in their like same city. So if you are an All NBA player, in your like during your contract when you sign your next one, you're up for the Supermax. So Luka was up for a contract. I think the exact number it was 5 years, $345 million. Who's going to become the highest paid player in the NBA this summer? But because he was traded, he's no longer eligible for that. And he lost out on $117 million because of this trade.
Wow. That's
yeah,
$117 million.
Yes.
Gosh. Well, I want to throw this out at you real quick. This may be complete nonsense what I'm about to spew, but I talked about this with someone earlier today. And it was, the fact that this was such an under the table type of move, of course, with the Lakers having LeBron James on their team. What are the odds that LeBron had some sort of say in this? Of course, not publicly, because why would he want something like this to get out of this was partially his doing? Because when you bring in somebody like Luka to the Lakers, that takes a lot of weight off of LeBron's shoulders at this point in his career.
Yeah, I mean, the reporting from around, LeBron James' team and like from sources close to him said he had no idea and he was out to dinner when he found out. He said,
but even if he did have an idea, he wouldn't say it though.
But at the same time, this kind of trade at this magnitude, I find it surprising. I mean, you look at Jason Kidd, the Mavericks coach. If you watched him during the press conference the Mavericks held, he looked pretty, distraught. And, the Mavericks GM kept referencing, me and Jason Kidd are on the same page, all this. It did not look like they're on the same page. It was one of the most shocking, weird moves I've ever seen. For the Lakers this year, they need to add a center. They have Jackson Hayes. That's the only center on the roster. So they need to add some stuff. And I don't know how Luka LeBron going to work, but when you get a chance to trade for Luka Doncic, especially with giving up Anthony Davis and just one pick, Max Christie's a good player. Hood-Schifino's a good player, but Hood-Schifino was never going to find the floor on the Lakers roster this year. You have to take Luka Doncic because now you have your star the next 10 to 15 years. It's LA. You're going to be able to recruit players to play with Luka in free agency. Like, you're going to have no problems building a team for the next 10 to 15 years around Luka. But for the Mavericks, it's just one of the most shocking trades ever. And Nico Harrison, if they don't win a championship with a Kyrie Anthony Davis core in the next 3 years, this is going to go down as one of the worst trades in NBA history, maybe the worst trade in American sports history.
Well, I was going to say this too, because of course, with the Indiana tie, Mark Cuban, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, how do you think this makes him look? I guess right now it's hard to tell, but as you just mentioned, if things go south or don't go as they hope to, like that can really make him look like an idiot.
Well, so Cuban's not the majority owner anymore. He sold his majority stake, and he is no longer runs the Mavericks, which is. He said in 2020, I think there was, I'm going to misquote, paraphrase, but it was something along the lines of he would divorce his wife before he let Luka Doncic leave Dallas. And I mean, wow. It's one of the most shocking trades ever. And I will say this, though, when you look at the Mavericks roster this year, I do like what I see from that roster. I think they need to, maybe add a wing. Like, they have a lot of bigs, but you look at a starting five of Kyrie Irving, Klay Thompson, PJ Washington, Anthony Davis, you have Lively, Daniel Gafford, Max Christie you add into the fold, and Spencer Dinwiddie. Like, the Mavericks are a good team and should contend in the West, but you don't trade a Luka Doncic. It's just one of those things you just don't do. And Mavericks fans are distraught for obvious reasons. I've talked to fans who've been lifelong Mavericks fans who said they won't root for the team anymore. That's how really upset they are about this trade.
Maybe there are some who that would be true for, but I can't imagine just dropping your entire fandom for, I mean, yes, the move might turn out to be quite stupid, but either way, that's neither here nor there. There was another trade that happened as well that was not nearly as a big deal as the one we just discussed, but De'Aaron Fox and Zach LaVine part of a transaction over the weekend as well.
Yeah, De'Aaron Fox got his move to San Antonio. It was, kind of openly rumored that he was not going to re-sign with the Kings, and he wanted to trade. The Kings wanted to trade him. He wanted to sign in San Antonio, and now you have a De'Aaron Fox and Victor Wembanyama duo, which is really exciting, going to be really fun. And for the Kings didn't want a, full rebuild, and the Kings got a massive haul if you look at it. Not only did they get Zach LaVine, who's, him and DeMar DeRozan reunited, which will be, fun to see how that works with Domantas Sabonis. Now they have, it's similar to Chicago, but Sabonis is is an all-NBA type of player. So he is going to be still the guy with LaVine and DeRozan as complementary pieces. But then you also add a first-round pick from the Hornets, 2027 pick from the Spurs, a 2031 pick from the Timberwolves. So you get 3 first-round picks. So it's a pretty good haul for the Kings. And then you look at the Bulls, Zach Collins, Trey Jones, Kevin Huerter, maybe not the best haul, but I think the biggest part is they get their own 2025 first-round pick back, which they had previously traded away, and that pick becomes massive because the Bulls now are very openly, tank is on for the Bulls. And you look at this draft class, you look at Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, Indiana fans, got to see firsthand how good Ace Bailey is. Yeah. So now you have a chance to get a top pick in this, really stacked draft class. If you're the Bulls, getting your pick back is massive.
Do you expect any more, maybe not as major as what we've already seen when it comes to trades, but anything else to keep an eye on before the trade deadline this Thursday?
I think Jimmy Butler, I'd be very surprised if he's not moved, just the way the Heat have, handled this, suspending him pretty much until the trade deadline. Jimmy Butler doesn't want to be in Miami. Miami doesn't want Jimmy Butler there. I know Phoenix.
I've seen so many updates on what's been going on with him, and he just seems like he's just a problem. Yeah, I know it's probably mutual issues between the franchise and him, but just some of the things I've seen reported about him, it's like, what is he doing, man?
Yeah, it's just such a weird situation. He, I know Golden State was very interested in bringing him. They kind of talks have shut down because Jimmy Butler openly said he wouldn't re-sign in Golden State. I think it's Phoenix or bust at this point. Durant, Booker, I think they want him. They saw, LeBron James get a Luka Doncic, and they're like, let's add to ourselves. And then Pacers fans, I think I've heard Ben Matherin's name in rumors, but Miles Turner is someone to watch. He has an upcoming contract that's going to be due. Do the Pacers want to pay him? How does that work? And, you have teams that need a center. You look at the Lakers. The Lakers are going to be very aggressive in trying to get a center, as Jackson Hayes is really the only big on the roster after trading Anthony Davis. And, with Luka Doncic, LeBron doesn't have much time left. It's not a secret. He's 40 years old. So you're going to spend, what you have to this season to try to get a center and some talent around LeBron. But I do want to talk about one more thing of the Luka trade.
Yeah, sure.
Jalen Hood-Schifino. Danny Ainge doing Danny Ainge things, just somehow gets his hands involved, somehow, winds away. I think he got, I want to say he got 2 second-round picks and Jalen Hood-Schifino for pretty much free just to, help the money work. And, that might not seem like that big of a haul, but now Jalen Hood-Schifino gets a chance to be on a team that's, not really contending for anything. So he will get the play. He'll get the opportunity, something he was never going to get in LA. So this is really Jalen Hood-Schifino's chance to, become like a good, solid NBA player and build a career.
Well, good for him, because he had a lot of promise, of course, in his rookie season initially, and things unfortunately just have not worked out as well as many people probably would have expected for Jalen Hood-Schifino. So good NBA discussion. I do want to transition to a little bit of Indiana men's basketball, of course. Kyler and I spoke during the post-game wrap-up show on Friday, kind of reacting to everything that happened between the Hoosiers and Boilers. And I hate to say same old story, because it's not. It was the same ending, but the story that was written on Friday night between Indiana and Purdue, honestly, I didn't put this out on social media, but for a while I was the game was reminding me, speaking of Jalen Hood-Schifino, of the game where Jalen Hood-Schifino completely lit up Purdue on the road at Assembly Hall a few years ago. Not that anybody in particular on Indiana's team was having that type of a night, but Indiana was in control of that game in a very similar manner in which that previous Indiana team was. Now, of course, they weren't able to get it done, and now they're going to have to make up for it in a major way if they even want to have a hope of making the NCAA tournament. But Drew, just kind of your thoughts on what happened on Friday night in reaction to, maybe what's ahead for Indiana.
Yeah, it kind of felt like the Maryland game almost too. I know IU had more control of the game than they did against Maryland, but it was one of those things, like you could go back to a ton of plays. Like you could go back to the 20-second mark, up one, need to stop, don't get it. Same thing against Maryland, but the turnovers killed them. 21 or 20 total turnovers as a team. You're never going to win a game doing that. And against Purdue on the road, you have to play really well to beat them. And, Indiana made a lot of tough shots. Mackenzie Mbako is incredible. Luke Goody made tough shots. Trey Galloway shot the ball great. But 20 turnovers, and, you have 6 from Galloway, 4 from Leal, 3 from Renew, 3 from Ballo. Like, it was just such an issue where down the stretch, I forget the exact, I think I wrote it in my takeaway piece, but there was like 4 minutes left. Indiana's up like 6, and their next like 6 possessions, half of them ended in turnovers. It's just the little things. It's consistently not doing the little things, and that's this really frustrating part about this team. You have guys like Anthony Leal who are great at the little things, but the fact this team can't do the little things for 40 minutes, it kills them, and we saw it kill them again like it did against Maryland. It's just execution in the small details, Closing out a game in the Big Ten is not easy, but this team has the talent to be we said it all year, they have the talent. Yes. They just can't figure it out for whatever reason, and this season has quickly slipped away, and it's not over by any means, but Indiana has shown me nothing to make me believe they can make a turnaround and make a run at the tournament.
Yeah, during the game, the way I was feeling about everything was, I was like, okay, the way that they've kind of controlled this game, and if they're able to pull it out, this is a foundation building type of game for the rest of the season. Yeah. And it can still be seen as that, but I really feel like they needed the win to kind of propel them forward, because now your back's even more so against the wall when you face Wisconsin tomorrow, again, in a building that you have not ever won in. You haven't won at Wisconsin in general since before the year 2000, but since they've started playing in the Kohl Center, I guess it was the year 2000, whenever that building became what it is, Indiana, randomly enough, has not ever been able to even accidentally win in that arena. And maybe they're able to get it done. I feel like every year we have this discussion now. Will Indiana finally get the road game at Wisconsin monkey off of their back? If they do, again, maybe we can kind of reset what we're saying right now about the Purdue game and say, okay, they've done something that they've never been able to do. If you can parlay that into a win at home against Michigan, let's just say you lose to Michigan State, but then you win your next 2, UCLA, and you get revenge on Purdue at home, that's a recipe for figuring things out. Now, like you mentioned, though, there's not really anything that we've seen that should tell us that those are the results that should play out. But we can't ignore the fact that there is still plenty of opportunities thanks to the way that the schedule sets up.
Yeah, just how talented the Big Ten is this year. Last year, it felt like kind of a down year in the Big Ten. So even, Indiana was in a similar spot as they are now last year, but it felt like they weren't going to have the quality of opponents to get those big wins. They have those. The schedule is there. You mentioned Michigan State, UCLA, Purdue. You go at Oregon at the end of the season. Like, there is opportunities. Wisconsin tomorrow. Like, there are plenty of opportunities for Indiana, to get these big quad 1 wins and improve their resume. Will they do it? I think they're 14-8 right now. I want to say there's 8 games left in the regular season.
While you're on that note, though, so Kyler and I were talking. This was during the post-game wrap-up show. We picked out, like, if Indiana's able to kind of finish the season in a positive way, what does it kind of look like? Let's just say they won all of their home games, right? So they're 14-8, and if you win the rest of your home games, that gives you, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wins right there, puts you at 19. And then we said they steal a couple of road games. I think we said Penn State or Washington, something like that. That puts you at 21 and 10, with the rest of those games being losses, of course. Which kind of, if that's how things play out, you're kind of where you've always been under Mike Woodson. If we're not, if we're being quite frank about everything, at 20, like just above 20 wins, fringe bubble team. It's not where you want to be with that type of a record, depending on who those wins were to come against, of course. You probably got to win a game or two in the Big Ten tournament, maybe. And if you get in, that's all fine and dandy. But we know how the Indiana fans have been the last couple of seasons. That type of season is not going to cut it when it comes to like the big picture of where the trajectory of the program should be. Now, maybe you get into the tournament and you find your way into the second weekend. Maybe I hate to say luck your way into it, but there is always a little bit of luck involved with the NCAA tournament. Let's say you get in and you find yourself in the Elite Eight, something Indiana hasn't done since 2002. Then you can kind of start having a different conversation. But again, we're far away from that point at this current stretch of the season.
Yeah, I mean and Mike Woodson's coaching for his job. I don't think that's a secret at this point. I think it's very well known that.
I think that's why they were so prepared against Purdue this past weekend.
Yeah, and that loss is really a killer because I mentioned the 20 turnovers, but they did play well enough to win that game. They should have won that game. Like, Indiana needs to figure out how to do a better job of closing games out. You beat Maryland and Purdue, two teams you led in the final 30 seconds of that game. You are leading in the final 30 seconds against these two teams. You win those games, you're 16-6. Indiana's probably now you're like a surefire tournament team at this point. Now, right now, I think they are first four.
You're on the outside looking in. You're not inside the tournament right now.
And those are two games that against good teams, but you have to win when you're in those situations. And when you fumble those opportunities don't continue to come.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens, especially tomorrow night whenever they go on the road at Wisconsin. I just cannot believe. I mean, if their last win on the road at Wisconsin was 99 or, a couple of years before 2000, I was, 2 or 3 years old. Drew, I don't know how old you are, but you might not have been born yet. No. What year were you born in?
01.
See, yeah, look at that. Indiana, in your lifetime, has not won a game in Madison, Wisconsin. Yep. So it's one of the weird losing streaks in college sports, and we'll have you covered for all of that tomorrow, of course, with everybody on the HoosierIllustrated.com staff. I, of course, will not be doing post-game wrap-up, considering it is a late tip. So it'll either be Drew or Dylan joining Kyler for the post-game wrap-up show. But, yeah, you guys will have everybody covered tomorrow night for that game.
Yep.
Nice little sip of water. Drew, appreciate you as always. Love the basketball discussion, college and pro, and we'll do this again here soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John.
Big thanks to Drew Rosenberg, of course, as always, and for, being the NBA guy, because as most of you know, I don't do a whole lot of NBA discussion on this show. And so whenever there are things worth talking about, especially things that don't involve the Pacers, it's always good to have Drew around to help us break it down. So shout out to Mr. Rosenberg, as always. Follow him on Twitter at Drew Rosenberg 2. I think that's it. If I'm incorrect, Drew, I apologize. But check out everything he's got going on at HoosierIllustrated.com as well. So we'll wrap up today's show by going over a few of the YouTube comments some of you all have left on my show, as well as the HoosierIllustrated.com post-game wrap-up show. And then we'll call it a Monday here on In Touch with Indiana Sports. But our friend Justin Beard, we'll start with him. He says, I'm looking forward to football season, John. I'll be honest. It hurts to watch the tournament, referring to the NCAA tournament, especially if Indiana never even makes it. I'll try not to say anything that will age like milk, but I think Indiana will get smoked tonight in Lackey Mackey. Well, of course, first of all, this comment clearly was sent before the game took place. But I'll react to a couple of those, the different things you said. First of all, thankfully, Indiana didn't get smoked, I guess. But, I guess, I don't know if thankfully is the best word. I know I said it would have been easier to kind of move forward with things if they did get smoked. But I guess that does mean that this aged like milk, right? At least that part of the comment did. But who knows what will happen moving forward. But you do mention looking forward to football season. And it's weird. I do think we're at this stage right now where we had so much fun during football season that it's kind of hard to put it away. And not that we need to put it away, but like, move on, right? And normally Indiana basketball, it helps us move on from a less than average or even horrible football season. But we had such a great level of success this year. Excuse me for the nose itching. Had a really bad itch come on right there. But we had so much success with football, it's hard to leave it behind because it was so much fun for the entire back half of 2024. Then you mentioned it hurts to watch the NCAA tournament if Indiana doesn't make it. I think that's true. Any team that gets left out of the NCAA tournament, it puts a damper on that opening weekend or week, whatever it might be, when you have games on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, really leading up all the way to the end of the weekend. When you have so many games going on and you're left out, it really puts a damper on watching the tournament, filling out brackets, betting, any of that good stuff. And other than in Mike Woodson's second season, it's just not been, and you could say the first season was fun too, even though they only got in the first 4 round and, then they beat Wyoming and then got demolished by St. Mary's in the actual first round. And then they came in with some expectation in the second season. Performed well in their first game. I think it was Kent State they played in the opening round before getting ransacked against Miami in the second half of the second round. So we haven't really had a fun ride in the NCAA tournament as Indiana fans in quite some time. I mean, you have to go all the way back to, I guess this is 2025 right now. So next year will be 10 seasons since Indiana made the second weekend in college basketball, which if that doesn't show you the state of the program right now, then there's not. There's a lot of things that can show you the state of the program, and I know the rest of the season, this season, still needs to play out, but I would be willing to bet that Indiana is not going to make the second weekend unless it's by complete accident. Now, maybe I'll eat those words, but we'll see. Justin, as always, thank you for the comment, and let's move forward with a few more of these before we wrap up here on a Monday. Here we go. Dabney back in the comments on the Hoosier Illustrated postgame wrap-up show. Dabney says, this was a disaster. I picked Indiana to win, and I'm here to eat my crow. Just gut-wrenching. Ballo had a right to scream and go after Miles Rice. I thought he was going to take his head off, and he probably would have had it not been for Trey Galloway. But Woodson's late-game suckiness, that's how it's worded there, was what this season was made of. We haven't beaten a tournament team yet. I think that's true. Trying to think if there's anybody. Anyway, not off the top of my head. I think you're dead right on that. Haven't beaten a tournament team yet. I'm not going to apologize for rooting for Indiana. Woodson is just horrific. If you want to see a new video of Ballo going off, someone caught it in all of its glory and the IndyStar posted it. Yipes, it's ugly. Yeah, that I know we've kind of hit on a lot of those things, and even the Woodson stuff, but I wouldn't say Friday and I said this on Twitter to a couple of different people. Friday as an isolated game and situation was not bad. But when you look at the overall body of work of how Woodson's tenure has gone and so many close calls, especially in the last 2 seasons, it just doesn't give you any hope for things getting better. Like, what more can Mike Woodson do if, let's just say he doesn't get let go? Let's just say he gets back to the tournament. And, we talked about the potential record of maybe Indiana being 21-10. Let's just say they barely get in the tournament. They're like a 10 seed or something, 10 or 11 seed, and they bow out of the first or second round. Maybe even that's wishful thinking. Let's just say they do that, though, and Scott Dolson decides, you know what, that's not very fireable. We're in no man's land with Mike Woodson, especially considering he's an alum. Let's give it one more season. He could do that, but we've already seen, like with last year's offseason, the way that he was able to put together a roster that on paper looked like it could play really, really well with each other. And I don't think they play terribly, but they're just so inconsistent. So based on that offseason, if you look ahead to next year, what more can Mike Woodson do to make you think, like, we know he can put together a roster, but the expectation moving forward will be, well, he can put the pieces together, but there's a more than likely chance that they won't, he won't be able to utilize them in the correct way, and they won't be a very good cohesive unit. Maybe on paper they'll be a top 15, top 20 team, but outside of that, what can we expect from a chemistry standpoint, a coaching standpoint, to to show that they can get the job done? Because if that ends up happening, the patience level, even though it's already short for Indiana fans, like next year, there won't be any patience. At the first sign that it's just going to be the same old story, there's going to be fan backlash. People will stop going to games. You're already seeing a less than full Assembly Hall. I don't know if there's been a sold out game all season. Well, and somebody already had this discussion with me in the comments before. I know the season tickets are selling out, but not everybody shows up at the game, which again, that's also a problem in and of itself. So looking ahead at that, is it even worth it doing a 5th year of Mike Woodson if that's how the rest of the season plays out? Again, I kind of feel like I'm getting ahead of myself once again, but it is worth having this discussion, I feel like, in some way, shape, or form, especially when people are, putting comments just about being fed up and done with just Woodson not being able to get the job done for Indiana. So, Dabney, I appreciate the comment as always. Appreciate you watching and listening as well. Let's see. And then kind of building off that, well, this will be our final one, and then we'll wrap this thing up. Kevin Casey says they've lost 5 of 6. Don't expect many more wins. NIT team, maybe at best. And yeah, I don't think at best. I think at best they're kind of what I've already laid out is, bubble team getting in the first 4, double-digit seed, whatever, that sort of thing. I think that's the at best for this Indiana team. But we already know what the NIT means. Absolutely nothing. And it means even less now in this era where players are opting out. And I think if Indiana misses the tournament, I think it's safe to say Mike Woodson will be gone. And Mike Woodson can still leave gracefully and hopefully, not sever ties between university and different administrative people and that sort of thing. Maybe they can find a way to gracefully let him retire, quote unquote, retire. Because I'm sure they don't want to have to fire somebody who is a former player. I'm sure they didn't envision this after the way the first 2 seasons went. And then, now that season 3 and 4, things have regressed a lot. I say a lot more. It's not like they've had losing records, but it's still not up to the Indiana standard. I'm sure if the university is ready to move on from Mike Woodson, but they don't want to outright let him go, they'll cut some sort of deal and make it to where, he's able to just say he's retiring, and then that'll be, how it ends for him, I would assume. Maybe I'm dead wrong about that, but that's just kind of the way I see things playing out. But yeah, Kevin, if this team's in the NIT, they probably won't be in the NIT, right? Because what will happen is, if that happens and Woodson's gone, all the players will jump in the transfer portal. There won't be a team to play in the NIT, and nobody would care regardless. And I'm not saying you would. I'm sure that's what you're getting at there. But it's just very interesting to see that's where we're at. And we'll continue to talk about this throughout the week. We'll, of course, have another result to talk about on Wednesday after Indiana takes on Wisconsin. And I'm still where I'm currently at, especially after how well they played on Friday. If they can get that Wisconsin monkey off their back, I'm ready to full on go on and say, you know what, back against the wall, just keep winning, find ways to win, and maybe make the most out of this season. Still, I don't know. Maybe you all disagree with that, but it's hard not to want. It goes back to Justin Beard talking about the NCAA tournament. It's hard not to. It's hard to watch your team not play in the tournament, especially when, for me, being in the Louisville area in Kentucky, with the way both the Cardinals and the Cats have been most of this year, and both teams are likely going to be in the tournament. I mean, I say likely, they will be, unless they just fall off a cliff. Like, I don't want to not be a part of that. I don't want to be sitting on the sidelines, right? So hopefully things change. Again, we'll react to more on Wednesday. Leave your comments. Always appreciate them. Love them as always. Thank you guys for all the participation. It makes the show all that much more fun. And we'll do this again on Wednesday. So until then, this has been another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com.